Good morning to our participants in Europe. Good afternoon to those of you joining from China. It's a pleasure welcoming you to today's event, which will focus on providing an overview on accessing the Chinese food and beverage market with a strong focus on the documentation required and how to overcome the practical challenges related to accessing this market. I'm David Orlandi, USME Center Partnership Manager, and I will be guiding you today throughout this webinar. First of all, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to AWEX for co-organizing this activity with us and to all of you for joining this event. I would like to spend a few words on USME Center. This is a youth-funded project that was launched in 2010 with the goal of providing free of charge support to European small and medium enterprises that want to enter into the Chinese market or expand their activities in China. Currently, this is the 16th year of life of the project, and the main services that we offer are tailored and targeted for supporting the enterprise. You can see in the slide the 5 main activities that we focus on. Of course, there's more, but this is the core support that we provide. You can think of the very first 3 items that you see on the left side of the slide as the step-by-step process to obtain the key information. We start with a self-diagnosis tool in which the companies have the opportunity to understand if they have any knowledge gap what concerns the Chinese market. So throughout this questionnaire, you will be forced to evaluate your actual level of understanding of the Chinese market. If there's any item that's unclear or that you need to refresh, let's say, the website will redirect you directly to the second component, the knowledge one. Here you can find all of the items that we've produced in the past years, ranging from general market access guidelines to step-by-step processes on how to obtain the relevant certifications to in-depth dives into the specific sectors of the market. So we hope that already at this stage you will have the opportunity of understanding any missing points, any question that you might have should be answered. If that's not the case, of course, there's also the opportunity of asking questions directly to our experts in China. So you have the chance to have one-on-one consultations with the experts under strict confidentiality, and you will have tailored answers to your very specific questions. Alongside these, we also organize trainings with our European-based partners as the events that we are organizing today, as well as activities in China. These trainings range, as it was for the knowledge component, from general introductions to specific evaluations of the latest trends, latest challenges and opportunities that we see in the Chinese market. Last but not least, we also offer an advocacy component in which we focus on consolidating and providing a coherent voice to the European companies that are active in the Chinese market or that are struggling to enter the Chinese market. With that being said, I would also like to focus on our upcoming activity for the 11th of September. This is a webinar that has just been published on USME Center website, how to get paid when doing business in China. This session is especially relevant because, of course, it highlights a key concern that touches upon all of the different sectors of the economy, all of the various SMEs operating in the Chinese market, and we will strive to provide practical insights and guidance to help the companies to navigate these challenges more effectively. Having said that, it is my pleasure to leave the word to our co-organizer today, Lionel Cohn for AWEX, Senior Project Manager for AWEX. So Lionel, the floor is yours, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Davide. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. So we have quite a big audience, which is great. So my name is Lionel Cohn, and I'm delighted to speak on behalf of AWEX, which is the Wallonia Export and Investment Agency, where I work as a senior project manager. So AWEX is the official public agency in charge of supporting companies from Wallonia in southern Belgium in their international development and of promoting our region's economic strengths abroad. So concretely, it means that we help Walloon exporters with market intelligence, matchmaking with international partners, participation in trade fairs, and regulatory guidance, which is very important when it comes to a market as demanding as China. So beyond exports, AWEX also has another mission. We help foreign companies land and grow in Wallonia. We offer personalized, free of charge support at every stage. So from initial feasibility study to the actual implementation of potential investment. So our team is here to make that journey as smooth as possible for potential foreign investors, whether you're setting up a new site or expanding an existing one. If you want to connect with us, feel free to contact us through our website. I will be sending the link later in the chat. So regarding the agri-food industry, so agri-food industry is a very important sector in Wallonia. So we're home to a very diverse ecosystem, from global players to a strong network of SMEs and artisanal producers. We cover everything from dairy, meat, cereals, and obviously, as many of you might already know, chocolate, beers, waffles, but also other beverages and plant-based ingredients, as well as new food and new complements. So today, we are very proud to organize this session with the EWES SME Center to help Walloon and European companies navigate the GACC registration and unlock new opportunities, hopefully, in the Chinese market. So today we have a lot of content coming up. So on my side, that will be all. Thank you very much. And now I'll hand over back to Davide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lionel. Really appreciated the introductory remark. And as it was said, we have a lot of content. So from my side, I will also stop myself and directly welcome Pablo Recio, Managing Director at EIBENS, who will be our keynote speaker for today. Thank you very much, Pablo. The floor is yours.
Today we will be talking about the Regulation 280, CIFER, and I hope that I'm able to make a presentation that is useful because the subject is complex. We will devote a lot of time for the questions and answers. I've divided the webinar in 6 different sections, not equally long. The first one is this one. I would like to give you a webinar overview. I would like to explain what it is that we will discuss today and what is that we will not be discussing today, because it's a different subject. And we've received already 20 questions before the start of the webinar. And even then, the point in case is that some things will not be addressed today, but you need to know them. Okay, I'll explain this in a moment. Then we'll jump into understanding how we got to the current situation. Why do we have Decree 280? Why before Decree 280 we have Decree 248? How one is an evolution of the other? What has changed? That will be basically what we're going to see next. Okay. On part 3, we review the changes introduced in Decree 280. We need to understand one thing. Okay, so here you are. We need to understand one thing. Today, on the 213 audience that we have today, right now, 213. Some of you are fully or are aware of what's Decree 248, and now you want to see what has changed. Others may be here for the first time. You may say, well, I don't know about 248. I know I want to export to China as soon as possible, next week if possible. Where are we? So we've designed the content in a way that should be valid for both, okay? Should be valid for both. Then we're going to jump into how to operate CIFER, obviously on a very superficial scale, because otherwise it will take too long. We want to explain labeling, but very briefly. I mean, we're not going to see all the slides for labeling because today the subject is not labeling. I'm just going to focus on what you need to change in the label, which is basically adding the code that you get from CIFER, okay? The C, country code, and product code. We'll jump into the conclusions, and then what we're going to have, what we think is quite valid, is to have a long question and answer, because we already got 20 questions. Just to address those 20 questions will take time, and I'm sure during the presentation today, we will get additional questions, okay? So this is what we're going to see. Throw your questions. I will not be replying them, but the USME Center and our AWEX team will be managing them, and then Davide will be asking. Davide, if we can move to the next slide, please. So the webinar overview. The first thing that you need to understand, and this shows in some of the questions received. We're going to focus today on Decree 280 and CIFER, and some of the questions I've received already indicate this. There is some confusion. CIFER is like the platform where we now manage our application to export, assuming that we cover all the basics. Let me go to the second part. Assuming that we cover all the basics, if there was a need for a protocol, so if you want to export lamb, let's say lamb, CIFER won't help you if your country does not have a protocol. Exporting lamb requires a protocol. Probably not only a protocol, probably, most likely, the Chinese authorities will require checking and authorizing specific plants and giving permission to those plants for specific products. And once that is done, then you can start with CIFER. Not because now you may have heard, and it's true that you may have, it's true, but considering the first part as well, that now you can apply directly to CIFER. You may have heard, we'll explain it today, that now you may not need to do it through your government agency. That's partially true, but not totally true. We needs to comply with all the requirements, okay? CIFER, let's say, is the place when you do fill most of the requirements, you try to register to export. Doesn't waive you from protocols if protocols are needed. Understand this because it's very important. Some of the questions basically go in that direction. And with this background, we start. Let's assume that you don't need approval because you're exporting wine or olive oil or candy or mineral water. You don't need any specific approval, or if you need it because you're exporting the lamb, that wouldn't be a realistic case nowadays, but if you're exporting the lamb, your country has just signed a protocol and your facility has been approved for a number of products, you already been listed, and now you need to do the steps of CIFER registration, okay? So this is the overview. Let's jump to see how we got here. Please, David. So one of the things that we still need to do, now I'm saying the protocol, I put the example of the protocol and the listing, but if you remember, if you've been exporting to China before, you also have to do the exporter registration, which is not a very complicated thing, but it changed at the end of 2024. And you need to go to single window and you need to register. Not a big deal, not a complicated registration, although it used to be easier in the sense that now the system is available in Mandarin. Somewhat it seems that it would be encouraged that you cooperate with your Chinese importer to do the registration. This registration you can do multiple times, it's true, and you get a code as an exporter to China. The number of digits expanded. So it has not changed too much, but it's not the same place where we used to go to register, and it's in Mandarin, which, yes, it is a change that there is no particular advantage for us, right? If we're an exporter, the issue that you change the website and the issue that I don't fully understand the language, yes, it basically forces me or pushes me to rely a lot on a local partner, which in the past I didn't have to rely as much. Has this been a source of problems? Not really either, okay? Who is issue all these regulations? Well, all these regulations, all of them may imply many changes, but the critical authority that we will refer today, that you will see all the time, and I will not be doing my job, is by the end of the presentation, you still see GACC, and you don't know what that is. Well, it's the General Administration of Customs of China. From now on, most of the people will refer to it as customs, okay? GACC is customs. You need, however, to understand customs in a broad sense of the word. It's not just the actual place of customs, it's the agency that takes care of the safety and the food, of the safety and quality of the products that are imported, in our case for food and beverages, and therefore checks for what is happening with outside the borders, and what is the procedures and what are the checks, and therefore is the institution that has pushed, for the most part, the changes in regulation to make, we're going to say it now, to have more control on what is imported. Okay, so GACC Customs is the agency, broad agency, that mostly responsible for what we're going to see today. Can we pass, David, please? So with this introduction, we go to see how do we got here. All right, so if you like to pass, we will start. We will start here. We can backtrack as much as you like, but I think the place to start is here. Okay, in 2015, that's more than 10 years ago, the food safety law starts serving as a overreaching, it says expansion of governing food safety in China. All right. And that's the beginning, although at that point, there is no particular restriction. It basically says we need to have more control of import, exports as well, but let's focus on import, on sale, on traceability, on recalling, on responsibility, the products that enter the country, also in the country, but let's say for us, the products that enter the country, okay? And based on that law, and then they could go to, we go in April 2021 to what is the big change that we can recall, okay? And then it started applying on January 2022, which is Decrees 248 and 249. For us, it's mostly 248, which is where we get to see a lot of a specific regulation. And when we actually get to register in CIFER, most of the people will say, well, Decree 248 is CIFER. Well, no, not entirely. CIFER is the product of Decree 248, is the most visible part. Decree 248 in reality calls for something bigger, which is, well, we're going to say it next, but basically we're going to strengthen, we're going to see it in a moment. So we'll pass and we'll get to this when we go to the 280. We have other changes that affect us in the process. We also have changes in standards for labeling, okay? The QBL 7718 and the 28050. Those have also changed. I'll go back to labeling at the end. But what I want to say is we've had a number of changes. We're not to Decree 280. Everything we're going to see today is not just new. It is been evolving situation, and you need to put all the pieces together, okay? Thank you, David. So moving forward, and then we also have the announcement 219 that basically it also says, listen, some of the products we're going to remove from CIFER. They says different things, but for us, some of the products that we put in CIFER, now they're going to be registered somewhere else, because not, as I'll explain in a moment, not all the products go to CIFER. Not all the products have to be registered in CIFER. Mostly the products for human consumption, even those, not all of them. Many agricultural products or some agricultural products and animal feed and whatnot does not go to CIFER. We'll see the details in a moment. Please, David. Okay, so now with this background in which Chinese regulation has tried to be more overreaching, has tried to have more control of what happens outside, is basically trying to avoid the idea that the last guy of the chain, if there's a problem with a product, the last guy says, well, I don't know. I just got it from the previous guy who got it from the previous guy. So it doesn't matter, right? I'm not responsible. And then what the Chinese authorities is saying, well, no, we need to track the supply chain. Everybody along the supply chain has to be responsible. We need to be able to locate them. We need to be able to assess the risk. We need to be able to punish them. It has to be. The idea is not crazy. There's other ways of doing it. That principle was also there before Decree 248 in the registration. Other markets don't do this system. So although the principle makes sense, this is not the only way in which you can manage the situation. But this is the way the Chinese choose to manage the situation, okay? So the idea of Decree 248 is we're going to monitor the whole chain. We're going to monitor who is producing the product. We're going to monitor the suppliers of that producer. We're going to monitor where it's stored in certain conditions that we will describe today. And that basically remains in 280. Decree 280 was announced in October 2025, came into effect 1st of January, so last month, the first day of last month. Not only that, but to actually fully understand Decree 280, you need to also see announcement 27 of 2006, which is in March. And after that, there is still a lot of guidelines and templates that need to be provided. This is to say that I would say that, in my opinion, the implementation of the change has been too rushed. And that means that there has not been time for the Chinese authorities to fully prepare and for the foreign entities to fully understand what is coming. And will this be a problem? Well, it depends on how everything applies. We'll see this at conclusions, okay? But it comes into effect. It has very similar principles in practical terms. It has very similar principles than Decree 248. This is about safety, it's about prevention, it is about risk management, it's about the full control of the full chain, and it's about international governance, co-governance, which means we need to also get involved with the national authorities of the suppliers, which can be done in many ways. Again, they determined that there is 8 principles, nothing new here. I just added here because they did. So I think it's fair that you can see it, but it's the same thing. I mean, the objectives are the same that I described. Full traceability of the chain, and therefore we can see who has done what if something doesn't go right, we need to punish if something doesn't go right, or if we think that something didn't go right. Okay, can we change, please? Now, not everybody has to register a CIFER. Not everybody needs to register a CIFER, okay? Not only that there is different ways of registration in different product categories, is that not everybody requires registration at CIFER. Who doesn't? If you do cross-border e-commerce, you don't need to register a CIFER. If you only do cross-border e-commerce. Cross-border e-commerce products are not subject to CIFER, okay? Food additives, fresh fruits, doesn't mean that it doesn't follow other regulations. It doesn't mean that it's just free export. I'm just saying they don't go to CIFER. They're not registered under CIFER, okay? Animal feed don't go there. Some primary agricultural products don't go there. And the list, we will see in a moment, was extended with the change to Decree 248 to 249, with a few products, not too many. Also, storage only in some conditions needs to register at CIFER. These have been clarified with Decree 280. Basically, we're talking about room temperature, so normally it's cold chain, that do animal-derived products, that is meat or aquatic products, not dairy, not room temperature. Okay, this is important. Is this an improvement? Well, it is a relevant clarification, and this falls on the category of changes that are rather positive, okay? Traders or exporters who only carry out commercialization tasks also don't need to get registered. Who has to get registered? Basically, everybody else. So everybody who is on high risk through the high risk procedures, that will be, we're going to see the list of who is considered high risk, because for Decree 280, many products were considered high risks, products that before were not considered high risk, and normally, by international standards, some of them are not considered high risk. Then they took some away from the list. And then also, basically any other product that is for human consumption that is not described on the lower part of this slide, right? So wine or spirits or mineral water or juice need to be registered. Not high risk category, but it has to be registered to CIFER. All right. Can we move to the next slide, please? What were the 18 high-risk categories in Decree 248? Well, these ones that you see here, okay? I'm not going to go one by one. Actually, rice, there's a small change. In the middle, you see rice, not really. It was a number of cereals. This rice is the result now with Decree 280, okay? So where you see rice, actually in Decree 248 was not rice, that's a mistake. It was a lot of cereals. In Decree 280, some cereals have been gone out and rice remains here, okay? Can we move the slide? So on the next slide, we're gonna see the changes. Two key ideas on this slide. The first one is the lower part, and the important is the upper part. Let's go first to the lower part. Frozen fruit, it moves out of the list of 16 and is an independent registration. It doesn't go through CIFER, okay? Edible grains is now reflected only as rice, because other grains that were there have been taken out as well. And unroasted coffee or cocoa, which is not normally produced in Europe, also have been moved to another category following announcement 219, okay? So a few products have been taken out from the list. Also, olive oil initially was high risk, and then before Decree 280, was moved out of high risk. But this is, let's say, the specifics. What is very relevant here? What is really relevant here is the upper part that I will explain later, which is, they say, it makes sense, but it all depends how you apply. They say, but this list is going to be dynamic. We're going to assess the risk of things, the risk of products, the situation worldwide and whatnot, and we will change this list. Now, with the examples presented, it can sound like the list can be shortened. You may be downgraded from high risk to low risk if they decide, and that is true. But it could also happen the other way around. They may come one day and say, hey, now this is high risk. And the frame already allows this to be done rather quickly. So it's all going to depend on the application, whether these changes are positive or negative. As we go, I'll explain you which ones are clearly positive, which ones I believe are negative, which ones will depend on the application. But since everything has been very rushed, in the short term, there is a risk. Whether that risk materializes or not, we need to see. Okay. What are the main changes? I'm going to explain you the 14 main changes from Decree 248 to Decree 280, and then I'm going to get into detail. So this is just to give your brain a frame. Okay. First, Decree 280 talks a lot about system assessment. What is system assessment? I check your country and I see if your country is worth of my trust. System not necessarily means a country. It means whatever they want to interpret it, with technical reasons, if you like. So we could talk about a country, we could talk about a product, we could talk about a sector category. But for now, because this basically raised a lot of questions from the different member states, is not a prerequisite for all products. They still apply what is called traditional trade. So if we've always traded wine, I'm not going to tell you, you cannot sell more wine until I go and check your wine procedure, control procedures and wine and whatnot, like I do with high risk products. We will trust that the system is good for as long as we've been trading and we don't have anything to say. So there is this idea of system assessment. It creates a lot of doubts. For now, doesn't change anything. Some changes on risk categories. This is what I have just explained. If you see it bold, if you see the letters in darker color, that means that I believe is more relevant. I mean, it's more relevant if it affects you, of course. So if you are the frozen fruits, then for you is very relevant. If you do meat, it's totally irrelevant because nothing changes for you. But in general, this is my assessment. Dynamic catalog. This can be this is what I have just explained. This can be very relevant because you can be reduced to low risk, but you can also be upgraded to high risk. And the criteria for doing this still have not been explained. They would say it's going to be scientific, yes, but adding scientific to a sentence doesn't make it scientific. What is the actual parameters that will be considered, right? What will be the announcement? What will be the procedure? Those are questions that we still don't know the answer. New additional path for registration of high-risk products. This is very, very important. Again, this could be a blessing or a curse. Now there is different ways in which a company that has a product that is considered high risk can register, okay? There is relevant changes, new possibilities. Whether that's an advantage or not, we will see. I'll explain this later. Can we pass the slide, David? There's also some changes in the documents needed to register at CIFER. That's not very relevant, in my opinion. There is the option for bundling up a group of registration from the member states authorities. So the Decree 280 emphasizes the idea of, but we can negotiate bilaterally and we can basically make exceptions. We can make exceptions bilaterally. We can fast track, we can get to agreements bilaterally. Again, depends how you apply. This is good or bad. So for now, I'm not going to determine whether it's very relevant or not. There is alleged extra flexibility for introducing changes on the application. So before, it was hard to make changes at different stages when you were using CIFER, for example, when you were in the submission period. And supposedly now it's going to be more flexible, although this is to be seen. The changes just applied a few weeks ago. Summer is upon us, so we will see. The renewal system changes, and this is a net improve because most of the products don't need to apply for a renewal. They renew automatically. This is one of the few net positives, not arguable in my opinion, that you have. You can renew automatically. Before, you needed to do it. You're supposed to get reminders, but you need to do it. Suspension and restoration doesn't change all that much. Can we pass the slide? But I'll explain a little bit later. Cancellation of doesn't change all that much. Storage facilities, yes, here there is relevant, is what I've explained before. Only cold chain for derived animal derivatives is what has to be registered. This is an improvement. Others, what I've explained on bilateral agreement, the data validity and goods in transit, not much of a change. And CIFER remains the registration system, although have small changes applied, and the platform has been updated. Let me explain this in more detail, because that's the core. Those 14 are the changes. If you were used to Decree 248, those are your 14 changes, okay? Let me explain them in more detail. So the system assessment, that's Article 5, not a prerequisite. So it's like, for now, I'm not asking you that I approve your system, and I will define a system as a country, as a industry, as a product later. And I will continue going company by company if we had a previous trade before. Question is, well, there are many questions here. The question is, okay, how would you, what do you define as a system? How would you assess it? Will you change your criteria in the future of keeping the products? If I'm a new product and therefore we've never exported the product, will that be considered what? So there are questions from the member states. Will this be a problem or not? Depends entirely on the application. In the short term, it seems that everybody who has been exporting before will not have any issue because of this. There's changes in the risk categories, as Article 6. Risk categories, so if you're high risk, it implies many things. Very likely that you need a protocol. And remember, CIFER, like I said before, CIFER doesn't waive you from a protocol, or from the need to be listed, or from the need to register your company, or from the labeling, or from the export documents. But high risk are those that require an official recommendation from the member state, okay? So now there's different ways of managing things. We're gonna see it today because I think this is very important, okay? There's this dynamic catalog that we have discussed. Some products become low risk. So initially the dynamic catalog comes with a couple of small good news. Whether that will be the tendency or that will be reversed, we will see, right? So David, if we pass, this I've already explained. So also Article 6, new additional path for registration of high-risk products. So if you're a low-risk product, low risk, say wine, I'm gonna go to wine, many European companies, but many others, all that are not in the high-risk list that you've seen with the changes that we've mentioned. If you're in the low risk, basically, you can register directly at CIFER, as you have been doing during 248, not much of a change there. Although there is the possibility always of this bilateral agreement between the countries. So there's always the possibility of an exception, a bilateral agreement for an exception not so much in the rules, but on the putting many companies together and sending them, or you do the traditional. So low risk, in principle, nothing has changed that should concern us. Maybe the bundling up from the member state is an advantage. So there's a potential advantage there for low risk. For high risk, different things. And you can see this as an advantage or disadvantage, practice will tell, okay? Now, initially, on Decree 280, they say the previous system remains valid. What is the previous system? If you were high risk before, you had to go to your member state authorities, depends on the member state, is a different one, say the Ministry of Agriculture, to say something, and say, I want to export meat or fish or dairy to China. And then they will make sure that you provide all the information, they do their own assessment, they put together the paperwork next to yours, and they were to send it to China. That's a traditional, okay? Initially, Decree 280 said, okay, that's still valid. Although announcement number 27 introduced a caveat, and that's for March only, and you still have questions from the member states trying to figure out how this works, saying, yes, you do to the member state, but you go to CIFER first, you say you want to do that, and CIFER, and from CIFER will send the information to your member state, which, again, it introduced one more step. Whether this will work well or not work well, that will depend a lot on practice. There's what they call option 3. There is still the possibility of your member states just having a bilateral agreement and putting together different applications and sending them. So there is this bilateral channel to be tested. And there is a possibility, but otherwise you no longer go first to the member state. You go first to CIFER, and then CIFER will transfer the information to the member state. Is this an advantage or a disadvantage? We'll see. Practice will tell. But in my opinion, it's likely to be a disadvantage, at least for some time, because there is many questions. You as an exporter, you have many questions. There are many doubts. It's probably better to be seen if you actually go and talk with your ministry, you figure out what is needed, they check it, they put it together and they send it, more than if you try to do it on your own, which you may make more mistakes, we will delay the process. But practice will tell. There is also another possibility in which you basically get all the papers from your member state, so you get the inspection report and recommendation letter, and you deal directly with CIFER. Is this going to be an advantage? Well, if you want to advocate in favor of it, you get the documents and you don't need your member state authority. You just deal with CIFER directly. In practical terms, for most of the companies, this will be complicated because if there is any issue, most of us don't have the experience or the knowledge to actually deal with it. And we don't know how fast or slow the authorities will be. You don't have much of an option to call them or email them or meet them in Beijing. So whether this will be an advantage or not, again, it depends. I would say that a tested method may be working better than this method in which on paper everything has to go right, but in reality we will see, right? To be seen yet again. But this is another source of question from the member states saying, how is this going to work? If there is some paper wrong, who is responsible for it? The company may not understand, may not have the ability to solve it. Then it will come back to me. How does it work then, right? All this to be tested. So we can pass the video. So these are our options. If we have high risk, let me summarize. You now have to go to CIFER. CIFER will give you options. Say, what product? Okay, what option do you want to do? And you choose the option, and the option could be send information to my member state, and then they'll continue with it, but I don't go to the member state directly. Or I have all the documents from the member states, I want to deal with CIFER directly. Or let's say outside this circuit, which the company can control, my member state will put many applications together and will basically, let's call it negotiate an exception with CIFER, okay, or with customs. An exception which is now basically under a frame, but it remains an exception. It remains a case-by-case situation, right? So that's the possibilities, and this is a main change. What I have explained is a main change. My opinion, if you want my advice, and lacking any practical experience because we not have it, talk with your member state to get a suggestion, at least, before you decide on the method. Different member states have very different capacities. Some of them have an office in Beijing to deal with these things, whether it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Some member states don't really have much of a capacity. So do interact with your authorities before you choose one path or the other, okay? What else is there? There is, on Article 18, there is an alleged flexibility on changes, on introducing changes in your registration, because without re-registering, okay? So basically what the regulation says is, well, if the changes are not major, you just ask for a change, for a modification. Well, there was the option for adding new information before. That was possible. You could add information, you could add products, maybe a slow process. You would like to try to get it right from the beginning, but the procedure was there. So now on paper, there's more flexibility. We'll see how that goes. What is a major change? Well, for example, if the plant changes location, that's a major change. And I would totally agree. Because if the plant changes location, that actually means that probably there is changes in the facilities themselves. Okay. Then there is the discussion with many questions of how about if because the decree 248 will say, well, if you change the legal representative, that's a major change. And that does make sense. Well, arguably, right? Why does it change if I change the legal representative? Chinese authorities basically reply saying, well, we need to judge it because, you know, an acquisition may mean that you have a new owner and the new owner may have a different way of managing the company. True, but you could have said that if there is a change in the management of the company, in a key change in the production procedures, then we consider that a major change. In my opinion, the mere change of the person who actually can sign on the company doesn't necessarily imply anything. And the Chinese authorities will say, well, you tell us the story and we'll tell you whether it's major or not. Is it reasonable? It's not unreasonable. It's probably going to be slow, but not unreasonable in itself, right? So we'll see how that evolves. We'll see if there is really an improvement there or not. Then we have the renewal, Article 20. This is a clear improvement. Okay, here I think I've been quite clear of my opinion, but this is a clear improvement. Most of the products don't need to be re-registered. They will be renewed automatically. And those that have to be re-registered, instead of 3 to 6 months before expiration, now you can do 3 to 12. That doesn't change too much there. They change on the other part, okay? This can be considered a net positive, no doubt. Can we pass the video? Suspension and restoration, not much of a change, to be honest. It elaborates a little bit on situations. Perhaps there is the one twinkle there is that it says, listen, if there is any suspension, if you've done anything wrong, if we feel that you've done anything wrong, now to solve it, you will have to send the information through the authorities of your member states, even if a product didn't need the member states to register. So if your winery, by any reason, needs to change something, this will have to go through the member state that didn't need to get involved for the approval. Is this positive or negative? The rationale is this way, the member states know what's going wrong, if there is anything going wrong. They have a point there. At the same time, you could argue that, well, they were not informed when the company registered. It may be a very minor issue. Running the solution through the member state will just create a backlog, will just delay things. There is no need for minor things to go through the authorities that have limited capacities for a minor change or for a change or for a small suspension that before were solved directly with CIFER, right? So we need to see how it gets involved. Cancellation, well, expands the ground for cancellation in two ways. Way number 9 is whatever they consider food safety. So is there a big change here? Practice will tell. If they don't abuse it, it's all fine, makes all the sense. We'll see how it gets involved. A storage facility, this is positive in the sense that it's very clear. Only animal-derived products. That includes meat, bird's nest, I think, and aquatic products. Those have to be registered. Dairy, no, even if it's cold chain. If it is not cold chain, nothing. Okay, that's a positive one. Next slide. The date of validity within transit, well, some clarifications, nothing major, so you can read it there. So if you need an official recommendation, only after the registration is granted, your products are acceptable. So let's say that you're granted today, 8th of July, products produced the 7th of July are not acceptable, okay? If it's direct registration, so if it is wine, and you just go to the website and fill your data, then you need to get the products registered before the goods are clear, which, for example, for wine will allow you shouldn't do this, but it will allow you to do the registration while in transit. Imagine you say, oh, I've sent the wine, didn't know anything about Decree 280. What are you talking about? The wine is already going there. You could still do the registration, which, by the way, for wine, normally has been taking anything between 1 to 3 weeks. You can do the registration in transit, and as long as you have once you have the registration, you can clear the products, even if they were produced before. That's basically what it's saying. The system, automatically, or will validate when you put the data on the system, will say, yeah, you're approved or not approved. And the goods are in transit, is the shipping day what counts, okay? All right, can we move to the next slide? And now we're about to go to CIFER itself to show you a few slides and see if you have any questions. CIFER remains the platform, It's been upgraded, if you like, it's been changed, but it's the same. I mean, it has some changes, but it's the same platform, right? It's not a new platform. And therefore, supposedly, and I think that's the case, the information just remains there. If you were there is some questions of what happens if you were just applying during the transition. We'll get to this in a moment. What happened if you apply during the transition? But it's the same platform. It's just been upgraded. Some information is now available even if you don't register, including the usual manuals for companies, the list of registered food producers, the product catalog, announcements, and the system user manual. Keep in mind that CIFER, for some things, will send you information automatically. For other things, if there is updates, you need to go there and check. If you don't go there and check, hopefully the USME Center or some program from the European Union or your member states will somewhere put the changes clearly, because not everything gets sent to your email as an update. Some things do, others don't, okay? So then we move for you to have a look at CIFER. We cannot get into details, but at least for you to have a look on how it looks. If you've never seen it, let's see it today. So we can pass the slide. So remember, I'm going to go back to this because this is one of the major changes. There's different ways of registration, all right? CIFER will forward it to the member state authority. To your member state authority will be forwarded from CIFER, and then they will continue, and then in the end, we'll get back to you. You can register direct to CIFER, to customs, okay? For those needing a recommendation and an inspection report, you'll need to collect that from your member state. For those that don't need a recommendation, well, the wine, well, then you directly do as we were doing before. And then there is also the option of the bilateral agreement, bundling applications, let's say deception within the system, agreed between the two countries, all right? Let's move to the next slide. So let's say that we're going to register to CIFER. Let's say, just for the sake of simplicity, that we have all the documents, or we do have all documents, and this is an advice. It's better that you try to put the information together. You scan, you check with the USME Center what information you're going to get asked, and you try to put it all together before you start. Why? Not because you have to do it in one go, but because it can get tiring and frustrating if you enter 5 times and every time you say, oh, now I have to find this. Okay, now I have to go and look for it. It's better you try to get your checklist and everything that is going to be needed. You try to put it all together. The annexes, most of the places, CIFER will only allow you to upload 1 document. So if you have 7 pictures of the products there, you put them together in 1 file. It's better if you prepare everything in advance. It will save you a lot of time and frustration and the possibility of making mistakes. Now, if you make mistakes, they can be amended, but everything takes time. Not money, but everything takes time. Particularly now that there's changes, we don't know if things will slow down. Maybe they don't. Maybe they do, right? So another thing is the emails. We can move on. There is 2 emails you need to make sure. One is for everything related to access and password, and another one is for everything related to communication and status. All right. I put it in 2 slides above. David, can you go 2 slides above so I can show this? Yeah, here I put it at the bottom. Maybe another place to put it. We have the account registration email, has to do everything that has to do with password recoveries and whatnot, and the application contact email. That's where you see the status, the updates. We need to have these 2. Obviously, my advice is don't associate it to the email of a person, right? You try to keep it in a place where more than 1 person can access, not to get missed if the email gets compromised for any reason, or just 1 person can check it and he gets sick and nobody knows the password. There is a procedure, of course, to re-upload it, but you need to have these emails. So probably an email that can be shared by more than 1 person doesn't belong to 1 person. All right, that's a practical advice. So there is a million questions, and I'm also coming to the end of my presentation because there are probably going to be a lot of questions, and it's better that we address them. we're going to have a look, because there is a million things. We're gonna have a look, and we're going to go seeing one by one. You can ask, hey, there is many fields that don't have an asterisk. Do I need to fill them? Well, if you don't find the information is critical, not necessarily. I mean, what is a must is what has an asterisk. Other information maybe provides no value for the Chinese authorities, may just provide more work and possibility of making a mistake for you. But we're gonna, instead of me asking the questions, because there's many, we're gonna go down, see the slides, and then I'll take your. So, for example, to start creating an account, you need to introduce a number, and that number will be your number, supposedly forever. So what number do you use? Well, the system with 248 at least was taking any number that was unique. Companies would preferably use their health, the ones that are associated to the health certificate. But I know cases of companies that use, let's say, their tax ID, and it did also work fine for them, right? The number has to be unique, has to be really certifying that is your company, and preferably the one that is related to sanitary and phytosanitary issues. The rest of the information, what I said regarding what is to fill and not to fill. Remember, extremely important. You're registering yourself, you're identifying providers. The address is critical. It's not secondary. The address is critical. It's one of the things with the legal representative that later is very hard to change. Well, it may imply a re-registration actually, which means those aspects you need to be extremely careful. You need to be extremely careful and consider. You say, well, there is no doubt. My address of my plan is the address of my plan. It has never changed in 40 years and will not change in over 40. Fine, perfect. But you have to be very careful, all right, on the address of what you register and not registering. Can we go to the next slide? Okay, so the CIFER now will basically guide you to, okay, what is going to be your application method? What is going to be your route? And then you will have to choose. I've explained the different ways, and CIFER will ask you, what is going to be the route that you follow? So that's the one that you need to have a clear view before you start. And at the moment, since there's a lot of questions, you should ask the European authorities or European projects or your member states, what should I do? Because we're on the testing period. Really, we're on the testing period. Everything we need to see now how it works. Then you need to include, of course, basic information about the establishment manufacturer, being address, and the contact details, the most delicate one. Can we move the video? We'll need to introduce also information about the product. There is a change here. Now they display more by product categories. Now, again, this could be an advantage or a disadvantage. Now you don't need to go and put the CIQHS code with 14 digits. Maybe it's aquatic, but don't think that because, let's go an example with nuts, because there was a question. Don't think that because we put nuts, you're approved to export all the nuts. I go back to the question of the protocols, the company listing, the products approved. It doesn't work like that. This basically says, yeah, you were in the nuts category. I'll attach a lot of CIQHS codes there, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily approved for everything. And keep it in mind, because we already have a number of questions. And then you'll put production, processing information, processing of water, human resources. You will see there, you will have to explain, they have specific questions, and then you have to explain your products, your production methods, to what extent. You don't have to make it too complicated unless they specifically ask for it. If it's very complicated, normally you need a approval. So you say, no, it's very complicated. I do infant formula. Well, again, like I said, for infant formula, you're gonna need your plan registered. So all the information, all that super detailed information has already been shared. Okay. So you don't need to be too detailed, but you need to explain the process. Can we pass the video? And coming to the end. So photos of the products that are going to be exported, all that. This is the place where we add it. This can change, of course. You may change the products that you want to export, particularly adding. I mean, if you're not going to export one product anymore and it's not bothering you, just leave it there. Just don't export it. But particularly adding can be added later. Again, it's all a process. You need to ask for it. It takes time, but you can do it. Okay. But like I said at the beginning, think it through. Don't say, well, I'll register something today and I'll come back and do the rest later. That may be very costly in terms of time. Think it through. Try to do a good job from the beginning. That is going to save you potential stress back and forth, right? Can we move on? So they also asked about the trade with China, obviously, for a number of reasons, okay? You cannot produce 20,000 tons and export to China 30. That means that you're trading something, you're not producing it. So it's a good double check method, makes sense. Also to see how big you are, also to see how small you are, also see if you fall in a quota, also see if you have experience exporting to China, and therefore they can apply, let's say, a traditional trade. For a number of reasons, the question is reasonable. Ingredients that you use, to what level? That depends, that goes product by product and standard by standard, but some questions are very clear, like GMO is very clearly put there, pesticides are very clearly put there. So some questions are very clear. Other, the level of detail depends a little bit on you. Okay, can we move next? Other companies in the value chain, and this is where we get most of the questions. Because it's no longer just the last company of the chain. And by the way, the last company of the chain can be a trader, doesn't need to be registered, no? But what happens if your product is produced in one place and you bottle it? Chinese authorities say, well, you can put both in the label, but I certainly want to see both in the system. I want to see both in the system. I mean, I want to see the one bottling it and the one who actually produced the product. So you need to identify your suppliers, your main suppliers at least. And ideally, they should also be registered, okay? Otherwise, the authorities could say, oh, we may have a problem here. So those also have to be included. Can we pass? And these, we get a lot of questions. The modifying the data. So to modify the data, you basically need to ask for permission. If you want to say, no, well, I want to change this and that, you basically need to change for permission. If it's minor, they will do it, allow it to you to do it, attaching the information. If it's major, we've explained what is major, it may imply a re-registration, God forbids. Can we go to the next slide? And then the renewal, it will indicate, the platform indicates whether it will be automatically renewed. If it's not automatically renewed, then for this particular item, you will receive reminders before the expiration date. Okay, this is an improvement. This is actually an improvement. We're finishing. Next slide, because I'll take your questions. What is a code? The code that you get. Well, it basically has this structure. This one is from Spain, but you can imagine, right, that just by changing the ESP to your country code, same. So the code is this long. First, introduce the country code, then the product category, then the registration date and the serial number. All right, and that's what you get, or that's the numbers that you get. And then you need to put in your labeling. Can we go a little bit lower? Labeling. Labeling is not the subject of the day, and I've passed 3 minutes the time that I had to this presentation. So let me show you just one slide. You don't see it too well, unfortunately. Maybe we put too much, but the labeling, although ever since I got to China, that's more than 20 years ago, there's been the thing of, okay, the sticker will no longer be valid, but so far remains valid. It could be a sticker, or it could be labeled from the origin for most of the products. Exceptions apply, namely infant formula, but for most of the products. And exceptions apply with cross-border e-commerce as well. But basically, in your label, you need to include this code. Okay, you need to include this code. In this case, you may not see it, but it's there. It's there. Is this a problem? No. Same as your importer used to print this before going through customs. Now they print it with a little bit more of information. If you want an advice, if you want to do a bit of marketing, if you have a WeChat account, you can also include there the code and provide even more information, both legally and or commercially. All right. Okay, so this is what you need to include. This is the very basics of labeling. Let me go to the conclusions, and then we start with all the questions. What are the conclusions? Now, my view, nobody knows. The changes bring some improvements. Renewals is the most common, clear example, but they also bring a lot of uncertainty. So we need to see how they were applied. If they're applied in a very flexible way, it could be a net positive. If this basically overloads any part of the system, whether it's the member states, whether it's more mistakes are made, then it may be a negative change. despite whatever is said. This we will need to see. It's possible, it's very possible that the perception changes depending on the case. Some people would say the change is not good. Some people would change that the change is excellent. What we're trying to see with a bit of time is what is the net impact, and if somebody is impacted very negatively, which we still don't know. The time for introduction of the change has been too short. It was announced, missing a lot of information, and some information was given just 3 months before. Some information was not given 1 month before. So the change has been, in my opinion, rushed, which means that everybody will have to play catch up now. We'll see how that plays out. Therefore, it's very important to stay tuned. I doubt this is the last time. If you're exporting to China or planning to export, this will not be your last webinar or informative session about Decree 280. It will not be. You will go through more, I'm sure. If the introduction of Decree 280 serves as a reference, which we don't know, but if it serves as a reference, what happened when Decree 248 was introduced? Well, it was not doomsday that a few fear. That never come to happen. It was not the end of times. But for some people, there were delays. There was the information was not migrated properly in the system. It was solved later, but maybe the container will spend a few weeks or a month at customs. Some companies will make a mistake, don't know how to solve it. Therefore, they got stuck for a long time without being able to export to China, or didn't know how to. So the experience of Decree 248 was not a disaster, but it affected people negatively in different areas. Let's see how 280 plays out, okay? And it increased the workload for your representatives from the member states. Can they digest now 280? Depends on this application, right? We will see.